webinar series. I'm Paul Deffenbaugh. I'm the editorial director at Modern Trade. We publish metal architecture and metal construction news. Today, our topic is going to be using metal on LEED projects. We're glad you've joined us. Before I turn over the reins to our speaker, Thomas Taylor, I've got a couple of housekeeping duties. We're going to encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. You can do so by writing them in the question block on the interface you see on your screen there. I'll monitor the questions and then raise them with Thomas at the appropriate time. We will also provide a copy of the presentation after it's over. You'll get a link in an email tomorrow as part of our follow-up to the presentation that you can download. The email will also include information about the CEUs and all of that stuff. Could you forward the slide, please? Today's presentation is sponsored by Firestone Building Products, and we certainly want to thank them for their support of the industry and their devotion to improving the knowledge and education of all of our industry's participants. They've been a big support of ours, and we're grateful for all they're doing for us. And they made this webinar possible. So today's, let's go to the presentation. Our speaker today is Thomas A. Taylor. He's the principal and founder of Vertigy LLC. Thomas is a metal architecture columnist. He's a fourth generation and 30-year veteran of the construction industry, and he's a noted expert on sustainability. He authored the book Guide to LEED 2009, Estimating and Pre-Construction Strategies. Thomas launched Vertigy in February 2005, and it's recognized as the foremost leader in application of sustainable strategies in the country. Its mission has been to assist project teams in achieving their sustainable goals, specifically by using the USGBC LEED rating system, and to measure building performance wherever possible. And as I mentioned, today's topic is using metal on LEED projects. Thomas, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here today. Before we get started, as Paul mentioned, we are definitely encouraging questions to come in from the audience and from you, the listeners, to this webinar. It makes these sessions much more interactive and much more productive. And any questions that are asked, we will capture those and you'll get them out. To start with, though, if you could, in your question box, if you could somehow indicate if you are a LEED AP currently or a LEED GA, it will help us with that little bit of a poll to understand how quickly we need to go through some of the basics of sustainability in the LEED rating system and how we can move faster. Because the first topic here will be to identify some of those principles of building, design, and construction, the roles and responsibilities of USGBC, the key components of the new construction rating system, which is what we're currently using, the differences between a single phase and a double phase or a dual phase submission, the roles and responsibilities of the various individual project team members, and of course, the significance of the LEED requirements and the typical specifications. This is something that we put in as part of the materials overview. However, it is reserved to, if we have time, we'll get into that case study, but all the information from the case study will be available in the packets that will be sent out. Our agenda, we'll quickly go through the sustainability and green building. We'll explain the connection between the USGBC and the GBCI, the significance of the design and construction submittals, how to analyze the prerequisites and the credits found in materials and resource category. Okay, so how do you look at strategies, how do you do your calculations, and of course the documentation tools, because in LEED it doesn't matter unless you can document it. The overall documentation strategy for the materials and resources credits, and by the documentation is required, and again this gets into the case study. And of course, if you have any feedback, any ideas to improve this series, this webinar, this course, any ideas or information questions you might have that you want to see in an upcoming column, please let Paul know through his website. So moving into section 1, so we don't delay here, this is an introduction to sustainability and green building. For those of you on the call, excuse me, who may already be a LEED AP or work on multiple LEED projects, this is information that you know, and you probably will find this fairly boring, because it's really statistics about why we do what we do in green building, where the energy is used, how it's consumed, and CO2 emissions, the consumption of potable water. These are all from the EPA, giving us information in terms of what is actually used by commercial buildings here in the United States. Construction demolition waste, again, from the EPA, they give us all kinds of statistics on how construction and demolition waste is contributing to the diminishing resources of land we can use for landfills. And so with that, there's an importance on how to importance in conservation of all materials and resources during the LEED project, as well as looking for products that have a high amount of recycled content, which we all know metal fits right in there. So the negative impact of everything that we talked about in our new buildings can be reduced through sustainable design and construction and the management, okay, because just because a building is designed and constructed to be a green building, it does not mean it'll necessarily be operated that way or maintained that way by the owner. So in order to have a true sustainable building, it needs to be not only designed and constructed, but it also has to be operated in the way it was designed and constructed. So in other words, you can build a building, but if you don't use it the way it's supposed to, it's not going to be that energy efficient or that high performance as what may have been predicted. So in our green building practices, we're focusing on really 5 major categories: the sustainable sites and site planning, the safeguarding of water, energy conservation, conservation of materials and resources, and indoor environmental quality. As we move forward, what are the benefits? Well, according to USGBC, we improve the air and the water quality in the ecosystem, we reduce solid waste, we're conserving materials, and the list goes on of all these great benefits that we get when we build green. There are some perceived business benefits, and sometimes you'll see designers or salespeople who will want to use these statistics. And while these statistics are still somewhat soft in our marketplace, we are seeing that there is data now coming in from the financial institutions, from the retailers, from the property owners that are really starting to prove these perceptions are actually becoming truth in the marketplace. Moving into section 2, we're going to talk a little bit about the U.S. Green Building Council and the Green Building Certification Institute. Now, for those of you who are not familiar, the U.S. Green Building Council set out to transform the way buildings and communities are designed and operated. They also, in their vision, want to sustain the health and vitality of life within a generation. So they're looking for ways, I mean, when you're really talking about what they're trying to do with the intent of all the rigor of LEED, is really get to the point where we're using less so we can sustain for a longer period of time. Okay, the purpose is to integrate the building industry sectors, to lead the market transformation, and to educate owners and practitioners. We're doing the education right now. Leading the market transformation is something we saw when we first started LEED, and people started asking for documentation on the amount of recycled content or where your base materials come from when you're fabricating that metal panel or you're fabricating that wide flange member or whatever you're doing in your line of business. And that goes back to the LEED market transformation. Before that happened, before LEED started asking for this, manufacturers didn't provide the information because nobody really was concerned about it. LEED started to transform the marketplace by requesting this and making the consumer more educated, and with the education, they're asking the question, where is my material coming from? How much recycled content is there? Is there a way to put more recycled content in that? And with that, the supplier base, the manufacturers, have stepped up and transformed the way they do business and provided that information and have now created a whole new eco-brand inside of our old industry. So the Green Building Certification Institute was started by the U.S. Green Building Council, and they took over the management of the LEED process, which is the actual certification of buildings, and then the credentialing of all professionals, which is the LEED accreditation process, starting with Green Associate, moving up to LEED accredited professional, and then, if you stay with it long enough, the possibility of moving into LEED fellow. Certifications are administered and managed by the GBCI. Okay, they follow ISO standards. Excuse me. And the Green Building Certification Institute coordinates professional accreditation programs with the US GBC. So in case of this, the GBCI, on behalf of the US GBC, has sanctioned this course in order to get your continuing education credits required to keep your accreditation and your credentials. There are 3 levels of accreditation. We already talked about that. We'll move forward. So what is LEED? Okay, it's a voluntary rating system. It's now it's a whole suite of products that address new construction, major renovations, existing buildings, core and shell buildings, commercial interior buildings, schools, retail, healthcare. All of these items are suite products, or they're products within the overall building design and construction guidelines. So depending on what type of work you're doing, you would go to these different guidance manuals, and they would tell you the specific requirements for the type of building you're working on. This was an evolution of LEED as we progressed from the first version of LEED up through the current version of LEED, being LEED 2009. You've seen the application guide to this additional guidance being supplied as more data is collected on these specific building types. They've been able to create rating systems very specific to those building use. LEED for new construction, which is what we're going to look at the majority of this, is intended for new construction and major renovations. Major renovations being any time you're going to affect more than 50% of an existing building. It affects commercial buildings, institutional buildings, manufacturing, general usage rules, LEED NC versus EDOM. Again, it's that 50% rule. If you are doing complete removal and replacement of HVAC systems, electrical controls, possibly building skin, windows, and glass, these are all things that would be put into your consideration on which LEED product to use for your particular project. So, in LEED 2009 for new construction, we have 4 levels of certification: platinum, gold, silver, and certified. This does not include, the point told us here, do not include the prerequisites that have to be achieved in order to even be eligible for certification at any level. The certification process starts with the eligibility of the project. Then you register the project. If you need to, you can look for credit interpretations. Then you go through your document and your certification, your application of documentation submittals, which again can be a 2-phase submission, one at the end of design, one at the end of construction, or a single-phase submission, which you wait till the very end of the project to do all of your submission and all your document submittals to the USGBC. Once this is done, then they go through a technical review, and an award or certification level will be offered to the team, and then the team has a choice to either accept that or deny it and appeal it. If they choose to appeal it, they can do so on the merit of the work that the team did, and you go through that appeal process on a credit-by-credit or prerequisite-by-prerequisite basis. And then there's a fee summary, because depending on the size of the project will make, and if you are a member of the USGBC, will have a determination on the final pricing that will be paid to the USGBC and the GBCI for certification purposes. Is there any questions about the USGBC or the GBC overview? If there are, please type them in so that Paul can summarize those as we move into section number 3, which is going to talk about design and construction submittal in the process. So design phase submittal, the USGBC has gone through and they've defined these credits as design phase submittals. Okay, in other words, the USGBC has said these credits, this list of credits, can be identified and shown that they can be achieved through the design documents. In other words, the drawings and specifications indicate compliance with the requirements of these prerequisites and credits. They will allow you to submit these credits and prerequisites and have a review done of these. Now, if USGBC and the GBCI agree with the documentation that's been submitted to show achievement or compliance with the requirements, then the USGBC at the end of that review will basically say to the team, we agree, and we anticipate that at the end of the project you'll get these credits awarded. The reason why it says anticipated is because they can't actually award the credit until the building is built, and that's part of the documentation process. So you say, well, wait a minute, if I haven't built it, how do I really prove that we're going to do it? The USGBC says at the end of the design phase, you can put in these design phase credits, you can have them reviewed, and with that, if there's no alteration during the construction process, you don't have to touch those credits again, and they'll be awarded when you go through your final submission process.
Thomas, I got a couple of quick questions for you. One of our listeners is interested in about the types of fees that are required by USGBC. Are they a percentage or a flat fee? And then also, I've had a couple of folks ask you to just slow down a little bit. They want to linger on the slides a little bit more as you go through them. But so the issue on the percentage, the fee required by USGBC, what's that? How's that work?
Good. The USGBC charges a fee for project registration, and that is a flat fee, regardless of project size or location. That fee structure, again, is affected by if you were a member or a non-member of USGBC, and then with that, and all those fees, you can go to the USGBC website, which is www.usgbc.org. And with that, they publish the current fee structure associated with certification. The actual certification costs, the cost that will be paid when you put your submittal in for reviewing the project, is dependent on square footage. There is a minimum price, if I'm not mistaken for numbers, it's $1,200. Then it goes by a dollar amount. It's actually pennies. I can't remember. It's 0.025 per square foot of the building up to 500,000 square feet. Meaning that it caps, and you don't pay any more for additional square footage over that. But the actual price structure, the actual fee schedule is published, and that is the most accurate information to find that, which is, again, the USGBC's website. In regards to the speed in which I'm going through the slides, I do apologize. The first section of that was all the basic information about USGBC and the statistics. I will slow down a little bit as we move forward. And again, if we start to move too fast, again, please don't hesitate to bring those comments up. This needs to be about the information you are receiving, not how we deliver it to you. In other words, we want to deliver it to you in a way it's best received by you.
Thank you.
Not a problem. So once the GBCI completes their conditional review and has ruled and said that the credits and prerequisites are either anticipated or denied, then the team can submit supplemental documents to the USGBC if any credit was denied in order to regain the anticipated, that anticipation or being awarded as anticipated. So they clear that up and don't have to wait until the end of the project to try to clean that up. And then appeals from a straight-up denial can be made at any time, either design review or at the end of the construction review. If you do have to appeal, this goes back to the fee summary. This is the only thing you'll pay in addition to the schedule that's posted on the USGBC's website. And that is that if the team has documented credit, the USGBC and the GBCI reviewers have looked at that documentation and said, we do not agree, we deny the credit, but the team still feels that they've fulfilled the intent of the credit requirements. You can appeal on a credit-by-credit or a point-by-point basis, and there is a fee associated with that appeal. And it can be ruled, and the denial can be overturned, or it can be re-denied. And the team has the opportunity to appeal again if they choose to do so. Formal certification certification of the project only occurs only after final completion, and that means that the construction has to be complete, and at a minimum, the fundamental commissioning of the building, which is a LEED prerequisite, needs to be complete before you can actually put your construction phase submittal to the USGBC. And only after that point are credits awarded and a project is actually certified. Up to that point, it's registered or people are working on certification, but it cannot be considered certified until the USGBC says it's certified and the team accepts that award level. So in the construction submittals, which is most of what contractors and a lot of material suppliers get into, and that is the documentation that the contractor is required to prepare at the end of the construction phase in order to document their efforts in achievement of whatever the requirements of whatever given credit that they're working on. The USGBC has provided this list of items that are to be submitted at the end of construction. So construction has to be complete in order to really document or evidence that this was done. The key ingredient on this particular webinar is going to be on the materials and resources section, starting with building reuse, construction waste management, material reuse, recycled content, regional materials, as well as rapidly renewable materials, certified wood. Okay, that's your materials section, and that is a large glut of the information that the contractor and or the contractor's supplier base will have to document for the LEED purposes, for the LEED credits. Under the indoor environmental quality, there are also some that are important to contractors and supplier base, and that is these low-emitting materials, which has to do with the paints, the coatings, the glues, caulks, adhesives, what have you, that are being put on the materials. And then there's different categories, whether they are shop applied or whether they are field applied. So these are things that sometimes get lost in the specifications because they may talk about recycled content of steel, but they may omit that that steel needs to abide by the low emitting credits required for paints and coatings if that material is painted on site. So again, it gets into the importance of knowing where to look in the specifications for the requirements so that you don't think you're fulfilling one and then you're falling short on another. In the construction submission, it is very similar. Actually, it's identical to the process that we followed in the design submission. You document any changes of anticipated credits, if there are any, and then you submit your documentation for your construction phase prerequisites and credits. They go through the USGBC, GBCI reviewers, go through, they will review the project, they may ask for supplemental information, they return a report that says anticipated denied or denied pending clarification, and then supplemental documentation is offered to the GBCI for final review, and then the final certification award is offered to the project team. Okay? And then that appeal process can take place if the team needs to trigger those. But hopefully everything's documented so at the end of the project you don't have to worry about having any appeals with the GBCI. Moving into section 4, we'll keep going. Hopefully the speed of the slides are a little bit more appropriate to the information that we're trying to talk about today.
This is working great. Thanks, Thomas.
Okay, great. In section 4, the project execution and the documentation of materials and resources credit, this is really, again, something that is going to fall squarely on the shoulders of the contractors and the contractor supplier base to document that they have fulfilled the requirements of either the prerequisites or the credits. Okay, so this is something that is of high importance to those individuals. Again, constructors and suppliers to the constructor base. There are 14 possible points in the materials and resources section. This is the way they're run out. Existing floors, existing reuse, building reuse, these 4 credits, those are things that it's inherent to the building if you're doing an existing building type certification, a major renovation. If you are not, if it's a brand new building in a greenfield site, you are not going to be eligible for credit 1 and 2 in this particular credit category. Construction waste management, material reuse, recycled content, regional materials, rapidly renewable, certified wood, these are all applicable to all new construction materials that are purchased for the project. And of course, there is a prerequisite in this particular credit category called storage and collection of recyclables. And sometimes this is confused because they have it lumped in as either a design or a construction credit to document. And this has nothing to do, the prerequisite here has nothing to do with the construction process. This storage and collection of recyclables is a prerequisite. It's talking about after the construction is complete and how the building is going to be operated and maintained. They want to make sure that the building owner and the occupants of the building have an opportunity to actively get into a recycling program and try to reduce the waste stream from the buildings. The construction waste management, which is the MR credit number 2, is a different story. That particular credit has to do solely with the amount of debris and how that debris is handled during the construction phase. And that's why it's all calculation and based on the documentation of the construction and demolition waste that was generated on the project and how much was diverted from the landfill. So the overall intent here is reduce waste generated by building occupants, extend the life cycle of existing building stock, divert construction and demolition waste from landfills, reuse building materials and products if they can be reused, increase the demand for recycled content. We talked a little bit in the beginning about market transformation. And one of the ways you lead the market or transformation in the market is by getting the consumer base to tell the supplier and the manufacturer base that we want more recycled content in our products. Increase demand for locally extracted and manufactured materials, reduce the depletion of finite raw materials, which is looking for rapidly renewable resources, and then encourage environmentally forest practices, which is the certified wood credit. Okay, we're going to skip through the building reuse and maintaining an existing walls, floors, and roofs. The information as far as the intent and the requirements of these credits is in the information that will be available with this webinar on the proceedings. But since we're really not talking about existing buildings at this time, I'm going to flip through these very quickly and encourage you to look at it once you get your packet. If there's questions about it, please don't hesitate to ask Paul these questions. He'll get them to me. I will answer them privately via email, or I'll answer them in the column, whichever anybody chooses to do. Now, when we get into construction waste management, this is different. It's a construction submittal. There are 2 points available. The intent here is really just to see how much waste you generate on a project and how much of that can you divert from going to the landfill by looking for local recycling or other uses for that debris generated from your construction project. So that's the intent. What do you do to fulfill the intent? Well, you divert 50% of your construction and demolition waste or 75% of your construction and demolition waste from the landfill. So if you divert 50% of that waste, you get 1 point. If you divert 75% of the total building waste generated on the site, you get 2 points. It requires you to do a waste management log and identify what materials that you perceive, or right now at the beginning of the project, would consider waste materials and where they're going. So consider how you're going to handle that waste, how much waste is going to be generated, and if you're speaking and you're negotiating with your recyclers and your waste haulers, are you going to be having to sort your materials on site, cardboard, metal, glass, general debris, wood, or can you commingle and the waste hauler is going to sort all that out at the transfer station? That's something that you put in the plan. When you're looking at this, you don't include your soil or land clearing debris. They don't consider that landfill material. And you can calculate your waste. Either you can calculate your data either in weight or volume, but you have to be consistent throughout the entire project site or project documentation process. And this diverted from the landfill can include any donated materials or reused materials.
Thomas, somebody would like you to just real quickly clarify what all is included in construction waste management. Is it any item that's delivered to the site that is not also used in the construction of the building?
Yes. Yes and no. So here's what it is. You have, basically this is, excuse me for my cold. Basically, this is a calculation that you take the entire amount of waste generated on the site, and then you look at the amount that's diverted in order to get your percent ratio. So you're looking at basically anything that is generated on the site that has to be disposed of at the end of the project. Now, let's use an example of you have a masonry contractor who's bringing CMU, concrete masonry unit block, onto the site. His supplier has a program where they come back and collect all the pallets from the job at the end of the project, or when they bring a new supply of block out. In that situation, when you're doing your construction and demolition waste logs, this is a place where you can quantify by weight, if you're documenting by weight, the weight of that pallet, and you can document that if we returned that pallet weighed 45 pounds and we returned 10 of them, so we diverted 450 pounds of waste from the landfill. You can do that. So it's because it's a diversion tactic. It's a strategy that was employed at the beginning of the project to reduce the amount of waste that would normally have to go into a landfill. So yes, it is everything that is generated on the site that would have to be disposed of at the end of the project. So hopefully that answers that question.
I have another question for you, just to follow up. Is there a rule of thumb on whether you would select volume or weight for your calculation? Which one gives you a better return?
There is not a rule of thumb that is published, but if you talk to the people who have experience with this, they will tell you always go by weight. It is always easier to get your calculations by weight, especially from the beginning of the site where you may have debris from a washout pit from concrete, or you may have tailings from cut-off rebar or what have you. Those materials are a very large contributor when you do a weight program, but when you do a volume program, they don't really contribute that much volume. Right, a cubic yard of concrete weighs a lot, but as far as volume goes, it's only a cubic yard. So you might as well take the benefit. Yeah, might as well take the benefit of the weight. That's my tip for the day. Okay, and then there is exemplary performance available here. The USGBC and the GBCI say, hey, if you can divert 95% or more of your construction demolition waste, we'll give you an extra point in your innovation and design for exemplary performance. This seems like a far cry, 95%. And you think about it, 95% of every single box you see going off your site is going to be recycled. This is what 95% means. And it seems like that'd be a far stretch, but we have been involved with 4 or 5 projects now that have hit 95. We had one project that hit 98%. And kudos for that team. They did a great job. Material reuse, it's a tricky credit, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because what this basically says is take used building materials and put them back into your job site. And now it's very difficult. Nowadays it's very difficult to get a used piece of building material that passes all the quality requirements and inspection requirements of the specification. So we don't really see a lot of this material reuse unless it's in a boutique type project where the owner is willing to be a little softer on the requirements of quality or safety or warranty because they know they're buying a used building material that's going into the project. So again, the information will be available in your packets, but I don't want to get to this because what I really want to get to is this credit here, which is recycle. In the metal industry, recycled content is huge, right? Because we want to increase the demand for building products that incorporate materials that their base material is recycled content, okay? And with that, it reduces the impact of having to mine or to produce with virgin materials. So what it requires us to do is use materials with recycled content, such as the sum of the post-consumer plus half of the pre-consumer constitutes 10% or 20% based on total value of materials. And now you're going, what in the world does that mean? Well, I will tell you. Recycled content is determined by weight. Fractions are multiplied by cost of total assembly. Mechanical and electrical, plumbing, elevators, vertical transportation, specialty equipment are all excluded from the calculations. And you can use furniture if you wish to do so, but it has to be consistently used from MRC3 to MRC7. If you are not familiar with LEED projects, you look at this list and you might say, what have I gotten myself into? I have no idea how to document this credit. Well, when you look at the calculations, the first thing you do is you look at your value of your recycled content. If it's post-consumer, meaning it's made out of shopping bags, it's made out of washing machines, it's made out of old cars, it's made out of old soda cans, that's post-consumer. It's been to the consumer stream, it's been recycled, now it's being reused. You get a contribution of dollar for dollar of that particular base material. If it's pre-consumer, meaning the base material was taken out of the industrial manufacturing process and then used in another industrial manufacturing process. For example, fly ash is produced as a byproduct of coal burning operations. Blast furnace slag is again a byproduct of running a blast furnace. That product can be used as a substitute in a concrete mix or cement. With that, it shows that it's recycled content. However, the amount of that recycled content, if it's worth $10 per cubic yard of concrete, you're only getting half of that, which is a $5 contribution to your total, because the USGBC says that's pre-consumer, and pre-consumer doesn't mean as much because our industries have always used this material. So you figure that out, and then you say, of all the material I bought, how much of it is recycled by dollar? And if your totals come up with 10%, you get 1 point. If your totals come up with 20%, you get 2 points. Now, there's certain ways you can look at this. If you don't want to use true cost of the project, of the materials that were purchased for the project, the USGBC does allow you to use a default calculation, which is 45% of the total construction cost. So they're saying that 45% of your total construction is going to be basically 45% is going to be those materials purchased for the project that don't fall in mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all those specialties. And then at least 10% of those specification sections, the materials purchased for those specification sections, have at least 10% or 20% recycled content. So that's what we're getting at. To document the submittal, you need a total material cost or your default calculation. You need a tabulation of the recycled materials, a description, a cost, and if it's pre-consumer or post-consumer, and the source of that data, is it coming from the letter from the manufacturer? Is it coming from, I just say it's recycled? How are you actually documenting that? And there is exemplary performance available for this credit, and that is that 30% or more of all materials used on site have that high amount of recycled content. Again, past experience, structural steel building with a slab on deck with a metal panel skin and aluminum framed triple paned or double paned glass, you're pretty much going to know you're going to get your recycled content because of the high amount of recycled content in all the metal products that you're using. If you're working on a project that is 100% concrete structure with masonry openings and punched window openings, it's probably going to be a little bit more of a struggle because your high-value construction materials that make up your total material costs don't have a lot of recycled content. So it makes sense. So depending on your building type, when you're looking at a project early on and somebody says, do you think you can get these credits, you can look at the building type and kind of make a determination if it's going to be tough or if it's going to be easy to get your recycled or your regional credits. So So here's an example of recycled content. We're using the example of concrete, and this one goes back to the fly ash example that I was using. You see how the standard mix of thick-set concrete is here. You have your rock, your sand, your water, your cement, your fly ash, and your standard has none, your admixtures. You take this contribution and you then take the dollar for that amount and you figure out percentage-wise how much each of these components, the rock, sand, water, costs. And then you say, okay, in this situation, 0.026 divided by 2 is 0.013, so it's 1.3% recycled content in 1 yard of concrete because of the amount of fly ash. Okay, so you can see the standard mix design, and you can see the mix design now with 18.6% replacement of cement for fly ash, this 437 and 100 pounds instead of the 537 pounds. You still have the total weight, but as you can see in this contribution, the contribution of total recycled content to your overall construction cost for that 1 yard of concrete was only $1.30 of recycled content. Okay? Now, if you look at steel, and let's say you're looking at structural steel that's $2,000 per ton delivered to the project site. Post-consumer recycled content of that steel is 80% by weight, which is $1,600. Pre-consumer recycled content is 15% by weight, which is $300. So virgin material is only 5%. So when it all comes down to it, your total recycled content of 1 ton of steel. So for that $2,000 of material purchased for the project, you're getting $1,750 contribution to your recycled content total. So this is why I was saying if you have a structural steel frame building and it's a metal panel on the outside and you have a lot of metal components, pretty much right off the bat, you're going to be able to say, we're going to have a pretty decent chunk of recycled content in this project, versus if you're in the concrete, where you saw that for every yard of concrete, even using 18% fly ash, isn't getting you hardly any contribution percentage-wise of recycled content to your total. It was $1.30 for $120 worth of material versus $1,750 of contribution for $2,000 worth of material. The percent ratio is much higher. As we move on, the other materials, the regional materials, the tricky one here, especially in the manufacturing of metal type goods, is that the requirements of this credit say that they have to be extracted, harvested, and recovered and manufactured within 500 miles. And then you look at your dollar amounts again and your total amount of materials purchased, just like we did for the recycled content, and if 10% or 20% fits all these categories, extracted, harvested, recovered, and or manufactured within the 500 miles, then you get 1 point or 2 points depending on the percentage. And there is exemplary performance available in this credit if you get to, I believe it's 40%. The calculations are done basically the same way. You can use 45% of your total building costs if you're not going to use exact costs or real costs from the project based off invoices. And then to document it, you have to have your total material costs, a tabulation of regional materials, the product name, manufacturer cost, percentage that qualifies, the distance between the project and the extraction, and the distance between the project and the manufacturer. So in other words, they want to make sure that both the extraction point and the manufacturing point fits into that 500-mile radius from the project. So when you calculate this, what you do is you go to Google Maps or you take a map out, you pinpoint where your project is geographically, you put the scale and you measure out 500 miles, you draw a circle around your project site, and if both the extraction point and the manufacturing point are within that 500 miles, you get the contribution for that material. If any of that process falls outside of the 500 miles, you can only get the contribution for the portion of the project that fell within the 500 miles. That's why with steel, sometimes it's difficult because then if you go one step back, if you're buying it from the mini mill and you go one step back, where did the mini mill get the raw materials? They can't tell you where they were extracted or harvested from because they came from all over the place because there's no documentation process for that. So it can be done. It's just tricky. There's lots of guidance that's available through the USGBC. That's another benefit of having your project registered. Once you have your project registered, you do have access to what they call LEED interpretations, or LIs. And LIs are a list of questions that past project teams have asked about various credits. So they'll say, well, my manufacturer says that his stuff is extracted in 4 different locations, and 3 out of the 4 are within 500 miles, whatever it is. But this is something that can be difficult, especially if you're being, as a contractor or contractor supplier, being asked to document this, because you're going to have to go back to your supplier base and ask them where are they located, where are they extracting the materials, where are they manufacturing. So it's something to be considered. With the regional materials, again, let's go back to the concrete scenario. You have all of this weight. It comes from a local quarry, local river, local municipality, local manufacturer, and you got 0.375 pounds of materials from various locations. When you put this example together, while it didn't do all that great for us with recycled content, that $100 of concrete, that is $1.30 worth of whatever was of recycled content. In this case, our concrete gives us $99 worth of regional material. So while the concrete didn't do a whole lot of good for us in the recycled content, it did some good for us here in the regional. Okay. Moving into section 5, and again, if we have questions on any of that, please let me know. LEED documentation. How do you actually document this? We told you what you need to document the various credits, but what's required? What is that documentation? Well, they're unique and they must be tracked separately. An action plan is a good thing to do, which basically says, from my estimate, I think our percentages are going to be X, Y, or Z of the different categories, whether it be in recycled content, regional material, rapidly renewable material, based off of my best estimate that was used to win the project and be awarded. You need your LEED product material submittals. They're required with the action plans. You need to submit your progress reports, which is a monthly accrual of the materials purchased and how they fit into each one of those categories. Again, recycled, regional, rapidly renewable, and certified wood. And then the product and material cost data. When you're looking at costs on this, you can take all costs of material up to the project. So if it has freight, if it has tax, if it has anything else, the USGBC considers that material cost. However, the labor to unload that truck, if it's your field labor, let's say you're sending a person over to unload the truck, that labor is not included in the cost of your material. They want to see material costs only, void any labor costs. Okay. In construction waste management, again, this is basically just how do you calculate everything that's going on or not going to a landfill but being diverted. You take all of the information we talked about in the requirements of this credit, and it's then put in here. Okay, so this is during demolition phase. This is what we thought we were going to do. This is how we were going to dispose of it. And these are our handling procedures. Again, this is a communication tool for the people in the field so they know what to be expecting and how to handle the different materials that are being generated. Right? And so then as you go through on a monthly accrual basis in your progress reports, you start on your given month, you need to have concrete, metal, wood, residual trash, whatever. And then as you get your totals from your waste hauler, you fill them in and your weight or your percentage, and then it goes back to your total and it figures out what your percent diverted is throughout the job as you go through, both year-to-date and total for the very beginning. It's depending on how long the project lasts. So you can see in this situation, the project has gone to January diverting 49.6%, to April, which diverted 81%, and February, which diverted 83%. However, when you look at months in total, because we had such a bad January, our total now is 66.55%, or eligible for 1 credit, because that's more than 50%, less than 75%. So that would get us 1 credit for MRC2, construction and waste, diverting construction and waste. Construction and demolition waste, I'm sorry. For recycled content, you need to take all your products that are purchased in your standard building divisions. You want to look at anything that's manufactured and extracted locally within 500 miles. Rapidly renewable materials is the same way. We didn't really talk about rapidly renewable materials, but that's because in the metal industry, we don't see a whole lot of rapidly renewable. Rapidly renewable, we're talking things like bamboo, wool, leather, denim, cotton, linseed, cork. Those are the types of things that are rapidly renewable. In the low emitting strategy, this goes with all subcontractors and applies to adhesives and sealants, paints and coatings, carpet systems, and composite wood. The first 3, adhesives and sealants, paints and coatings, and carpet systems, have to do with field application, and composite wood is both field application and stretches back into the manufacturing process as well. This is what an action plan looks like. It's just an example of one that we've made up for past projects, and it just says that the declaration at the beginning of the job of what you think you're going to do by contractor or by trade or by CSI specification section. Then when we do the LEED progress report, we go back and say, okay, now this is the product name, this is who we bought it for, and this is how much it costs. So we take that and we track that on a monthly basis, and then that information is then put into a master calculator spreadsheet. That master calculator spreadsheet has every specification section listed in it that would apply to here, a description of what that would be, who the contractor is supplying it, the total amount of their contract when it was awarded, and then as we go through, we do a monthly accrual as that material is procured, and we add it into the list, which then identifies from our progress report to the spreadsheet. Then it goes through and does the calculation on the bottom of the page. And I wish we had the bottom of the page. I thought we did on this slide. I apologize. But on the bottom, it runs up your totals. And in our case, what we've done is we have this sub-tab for just recycled material. However, then we have roll-ups so that we can track our recycled, our regional, our rapidly renewable, and our certified wood all in the same master spreadsheet. This is your source of information, the manufacturer's letter. Again, LEED and the LEED reviewers will ask to see this information occasionally. If the project gets audited, or then they want to see a representative sample of all the materials that were used on the project site. So those product submittals that you put in at the beginning of the project may have to be used again to document LEED. Once you have all your documentation done and your spreadsheets filled out, you put all of that information together, you put your package together, you send it to the owner, or you send it to the prime contractor, or you send it to the design team, whoever is the lead for LEED, the L-E-A-D for L-E-E-D, and they will take that, they'll upload it on the LEED online, the electronic format. That'll go to USGBC, they'll review it, and hopefully they'll agree with your documentation, and you'll be awarded 3 points, 2 for the credit for recycled content, for using 10% and 20%, and then your additional exemplary performance credit, your extra credit for 30%. That's the information that we wanted to furnish you today. We didn't get into the case study, but again, the case study is available. If we have any questions whatsoever in the last few minutes, we can do that. Would love to hear any questions from you. Again, if it isn't here during the webinar with the last few minutes that we have, we'd love to see them come in on the website to Paul, and I'm always looking for ideas and suggestions for new columns in metal making, in metal architecture. So with that, Paul, is there any other closing comments or questions?
Yeah, Thomas, we do have, thank you very much. We do have a couple of questions that folks have put in that I wanted to get to. One of our listeners was interested in the relationship between U.S. GBC and the Canadian GBC. Is there just kind of a quid pro quo? Do you have familiarity with that issue?
Yes, I can answer that question. Early on in the U.S. GBC's history, they were looking at licensing agreement, and they practiced with Canada. With that, Canada bought the rights to use LEED and to adjust the LEED rating system for Canadian building practices. And with that became the Canadian Green Building Council and the Canadian version of LEED. So it was licensed and it was sanctioned, but it was administered, and the certification process was all handled separately. So projects that were registered by the Canadian Green Building Council using the LEED version or the Canadian version of LEED are not US GBC LEED certified. But you can use the US GBC's LEED product anywhere in the world. So if you wanted to use the US GBC's reviewers for a project in Canada, that would be allowed.
Great, thank you. Another question, and I'll try to figure out how to ask this clearly, but it goes back to the regional content issue, where you draw a circle 500 miles around the project, and that
Yes,
wherever the material is harvested or whatever, and then taken to a manufacturing plant. If the manufacturing plant is outside that circle, you lose points, correct? But,
well, you lose your percentage of contribution.
Okay.
Right. So now what you have to do is you can say, okay, we have a raw White Plains member, and our mini mill and extraction point we can determine within our 500 miles. Now I've shipped that to a fabricator who's outside my 500 miles to do a manufacturing process, right? They're taking the raw piece, they're cutting it.
I think the question the person's getting to is, it would be possible then to have, manufacturing and raw materials on opposite sides of that circle,
right?
And that would be less efficient than actually having the manufacturer slightly outside the circle, nearer the.
Well, yeah, that is true, and sometimes the way you calculate things for LEED don't necessarily make sense. I had a project one time that was extracting granite from a local quarry, shipping it to a stonemason that was outside of the 500 miles, shipping it back to the project site to be put on the building. And that makes no sense whatsoever, and you would say, okay, so that material is not valid. It is, because what you do then is you look at the cost of the extraction and the cost of the manufacturing, and you can take the cost of the extraction as a contribution to your regional material, where you can't take the cost of the manufacturing.
Okay, that makes so it balances out in another way.
Yes, it can be balanced out. Yes.
Right. Final question here: how long does a review process usually take?
A review process is all dependent on your level of documentation. If your level of documentation is good and you have no appeals and you don't have a lot of review comments to respond to, you can probably expect a forecast of about 3 months from the time you first put your submission in until you get your final award ruling from the GBCI.
And there has been talk about going back. So this is all certification as at the point the building's completed. But there's been no talk about going back and a couple of years later and certifying performance. Is that still in the process?
They have rules in place right now where building owners must turn over their building data, electric use, water use, so forth and so on, to the US GBC for their research for a period of 5 years. That is not a reinspection or re-review of the project. It's just an obligation the building owner has. The review, or the continual review in order to keep a certification, is something that they being the US GBC is talking about. I think you're going to hear a lot more conversation about that once they launch the new version of LEED and people start using it. Once they get that project behind them, I think they can focus on the new project, which would be how do we go out and re-inspect to make sure these buildings are actually doing what they said they were going to do.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much. What a great presentation. Certainly appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Also wanted to thank Firestone Building Products again for their sponsorship in making this happen. We certainly appreciate their support and value it. Everybody will be receiving who was on the webinar today will be receiving an email tomorrow that will have a link to our website where they can download these materials and review at their leisure. And as well as, I think Thomas clicked forward on the slide here, we have some additional materials at the end of it that we put in here, which are a case study of LEED and contract documents that you might find interesting as well. We just realized we didn't have time to go through all of that as well during the seminar today. But thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Firestone. And look forward to seeing you all next time we do a webinar. Thank you.